All right, ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
All right, cool. All right, podcast episode 6. I'm here with my good friend Aidan.
Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Having a fun time, just hanging out a little bit on a Sunday night. And we're going to get into today's social currency, and I think later on we'll pivot more toward virtue signaling. So kind of just give them a quick background of where you're from, kind of we both go to the same university, kind of in the same field a little bit. So bring us up to pace on kind of what's going on with your life right now.
So right now I'm a Towson University student pursuing his bachelor's degree in advertising, mass communication, and business communication. Basically, I want to work in account management, and I have a strong background in technology. I want to work in predictive analytics, and our world in terms of the way that people are catered certain things to is becoming more and more complicated. And it's an exciting time to both be a consumer and also be someone who's kind of the in-between for that sort of thing. So it's definitely something I want to
Essentially,
high
it's
of.
how you're getting to that point where people are buying XYZ product or listening to your service or something like that, and kind of what makes them tick in the sense of why are they picking you over something else.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So going off this a little bit too, kind of, we're also taking one of the same classes, and a lot of things that are coming up with it, I think you aptly kind of defined or put in a scenario or a good term is social currency. So for that, kind of, could you define that maybe succinctly, give a few examples of it, and kind of how it relates to maybe topics at Y that we brought up?
Yeah, absolutely. So in sort of this kind of context, social currency is value within a community or a group, just between a group of individuals that is derived rather than the explicit raw utility of something that's like of a physical quality, and more about like the way that your actions create value in the eyes of other people.
Okay.
And then this can exist in forms of beliefs or other things like that.
Yeah, and so the way that subverting, regular financial currency or something like that for it is be the dollars and cents or your beliefs, thoughts, actions, how you interact with other people in the world, whether that can be recorded in a social media setting, posted, with a specific hashtag if you're on the side of one movement or event or something like that versus the other, and that's how you can kind of gain ranks, ascend, descend in kind of those orders, rather than, what's in your bank account, kind of, which seems to be a lot of people's driving factors now even.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the idea, and with the advent of social media and modern internet communication, has been able to connect people from all over the world in communities that would normally be very small or very exclusive, that have been able to grow because they can reach more people on an unprecedented scale.
Exactly.
Basically, social currency, social media and the internet does for the idea of social currency what the idea of the original credit card in the Diners Club did for money and banking.
So it's kind of almost, I think so. That's an interesting analogy that I didn't think of, debit versus credit. Debit meaning you have that money somewhere and it's coming straight out of something, while credit, you're kind of putting it on loan, and that's how you almost appear to have money or something like that, or appear to have a higher status than you do. So maybe for a social currency perspective, as people who hold a specific belief, movement, or et cetera, like that too, they're kind of almost putting their reputation on loan without having a lot of background or substance to bolster it. Kind of, it's kind of just having the facade versus like the actual depth to a person's personality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in a way, you could relate that sort of the way, like you said, where someone who finances something on the idea of a credit card may be perceived to be more wealthy than someone who participates in multiple different events to reap the same benefits, but they don't have that strong foundation in the context of what they're trying to build on. A good example of that would be the idea of slacktivism, right? The act where someone, like Coney 2012 was a good example of that movement, where there were a lot of people out there who they really felt they wanted to be a part of something, and this is a brilliant example because this was a movement that this guy who had visited Africa a couple times before, he didn't really like. He had seen that child soldiers in a bunch of different warring nations were kind of a big deal. But especially when it came to Uganda and their internal conflicts, he wanted to draw attention to the infamous warlord Joseph Kony, who was causing children to kill and eat their parents and do various other things like that.
Exactly.
It was pretty awful. But the thing about that was that Joseph Kony at the time was actually on the run from the Ugandan government, and the problem wasn't obviously eradicated, but it was very relatively under control. It was like the impact that Osama bin Laden had when he was at large and sponsored by us.
That's true.
Versus the impact that Osama bin Laden had hiding in a cave when we were hunting him.
Yeah, it was less about the context of the current situation and more about the perceived threat or issue that was going on, and then people could just hop on board, throw some money at it, throw a hashtag at it, and that obviously, if you were in on that, on the ground floor and stuff, floor too, people would definitely see that, like, okay, that person's, to use the term that I personally don't like as much, but woke, throwing that in quotation marks, and,
oh yeah, totally,
and how maybe that's how you score those points for that team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a big part of it, right? Is that, I mean, Code 2012 was an enormous awareness campaign, but that's all it did. It wasn't seeking to correct a problem. It was seeking to draw attention to a problem, and with the hopes of drawing a movement. At the time, it was the most viewed video on the internet ever, in such a short period of time, especially. It was a giant deal. But basically, it's one of these things where by participating in this, by people who donated money to get their stickers and flyers mailed to them, that most people didn't end up using, and it ended up creating just a giant litter problem and graffiti problem everywhere. And it was ultimately, Cody 2012 drew awareness and made people aware of it, but it was very scammy from the beginning, to the point where their organizer, he had that mental breakdown and stuff like that, because he realized, in the same way that you said, someone who has borrowed more than they can, someone who has borrowed more than what they can really, pay off, or what they can own up for, when it came time for people to actually do something about Coney, or when people are looking towards him for the actual event,
there weren't exactly. There weren't calls of, thousands of people going there to try to rectify the situation or figure out what's really going on, or break a story, or, get the UN to push some kind of sanctions or figure out what's going on. It was just, this is what's going on, and we're going to be a part of it, and that's going to make us look good.
Right, exactly. But the idea, just the notion of participating, of the way it dramatized this as fighting a war for child rights in a foreign land,
could be more noble than that.
Right, absolutely. And it's kind of that same idea that a lot of people pick apart certain films like Avatar that tell the same story of someone, right, nobly fighting a battle that isn't theirs, not really having full awareness and understanding what they're even fighting in the first place, and they come from the same group of people who, they're originally working for the same group of people, right. So, obviously, that's not, it's not supposed to be a direct parallel, but it's that same kind of feeling, right? How, people feel righteous in doing something.
Oppressor
like that.
Versus oppressed, and then the way you get on the right team is by switching over and doing it that way. No, 100%. So to kind of pivot off of that too a little bit, do you think that the market kind of will direct itself more towards this, building up of the social currency rather than even, the financial incentives that they can make off of it? Or is that the way that they're going to make more money, is by pushing the followers, pushing the celebrity kind of meme of what's going on there to take the people's money without them almost knowing?
Well, no, from a marketing perspective, rapport within a community has always been solid, very, probably the most important aspect, way more important than an object's feature or product's features and stuff. This is something that we saw with the rise and evolution of advertisement post World War II, where once, especially during this economic boom, when people started to suddenly start buying things less because it was a direct necessity, and started buying more things because it appealed to them. The way that the more technology became involved in our lives, and the more convenient and comfortable things became, the more resources and time we had to spend on something that was maybe over form, or the way, or personal utility rather than its explicit function.
Yeah, you don't need a car, you need the car. You need not 100%. A house, you need the house, the white picket fence, etc. The dream from the 1950s, and how pushing away from necessity and more toward want and desire. A lot of people even like to push off our generation, the millennials and stuff, like, we're getting more toward that, and it's just, softening the kind of cultural fabric that's going around there. People don't have, the same dedication, the same motivation, however you want to do it, and that's kind of weakening that inherent system a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about perception. It's all about the way that people perceive you, and especially because, important decisions are made by top-down executive boards. For big companies, decisions. We're talking about like large companies and corporations and stuff like that. Social media has been something that has been interesting in contextualizing rapport and people's opinions on certain products or really the identity of a business. We see companies like Wendy's, for example, or on Twitter starting beef, serving up beef with people and stuff, and it's become part of their personality. But you'll notice that they'll pick fights over industry things related, like with fast food and other things like that. But very rare. But they're very, very explicit in staying away from
political or social
issues, anything that can cause discourse. Because that's what it's about. It's about trying to build up as much as possible and get in, like, the same way that you can use humor in a situation to really get people to be more agreeable with you, or to be more receiving of certain ideas, rather than just explicitly coming at someone for something.
Yeah. So off that point a little bit too. More recently with the whole Nike commercial with Colin Kaepernick, is that's exactly what they were trying to do, is say, hey, we had this guy who was on this movement in the NFL. And, he paid that price for it, the ultimate price, or however the ad went, to make him seem like he's, sacrificed so much for the good of so many individuals and bettered so many lives, that was that social currency kind of kicking in. But then it kind of immediately backfired, and Nike lost like millions in sales, I believe, then like in the time soon after there, or at least had some kind of impact on them.
It had an initial impact on them, again, right, because the thing is that controversy, regardless of what your political alignment with it is, regardless of what nature, is bad. A good example of this is Disney with James Gunn. James Gunn used to write films for Troma. He was a screenwriter for Troma. They made The Toxic Avenger and various other gratuitous, campy, controversial films.
Exactly.
And the thing is that, like, before that, James Gunn had written, like, Slither. Before Guardians of the Galaxy, James Gunn had written, like, Slither, and he wrote the original screenplay for the live action Scooby-Doo movie, which was
film.
And it's Halloween, so it's kind of on my radar again around this time of year.
Of course.
And just as a sort of side note, that was something that is a good example of this, where he originally wrote it as a film for more adult audiences that then because the network and the producers and stuff, not the network, but their producers and the people in charge, Warner Brothers, wanted it to be more kid and family friendly and less controversial, because even though controversy drums up and gets people to see things, right? Yeah. But it also has the possibility of pushing a lot of people away, especially if it ends up becoming like that ripple in the pond effect. But they even reportedly used CGI to edit out people's cleavage in a lot of the beach scenes, and you can kind of see it actually if you look at some of the people in the background. If you go and rewatch the film, it's pretty interesting. But that was an example of a film that was framed in a certain way that then was a product that was then corrected to be more broad and in line with things. So you've got the people who look to drum up attention by picking sides, and then there's the people who refuse to take sides. Like Disney still, even though people consider like representation of homosexuality and stuff like that in media to be an important factor in the idea of representation, teaching people, you know what I mean, or just at least showing that it's more prevalent than like non-existent at all, right?
Exactly. So backing up from that point too, what do you think is maybe more effective, or is it just different in terms of strategies, that you either rock the boat and you have that controversy, and that it's kind of like playing with fire a little bit, or playing with an explosive device. It might blow up the other team and make you look really good, or it might blow up in your face, versus kind of keeping the status quo, not rocking the boat, just focusing on building a business or building an idea or something like that. Do you think they both have, obviously pros and cons, but I feel like most people in a lot of companies, and just in daily life and how you interact with other people, you're not going to be the firecracker who might get burned or something like that too. You're rather just going to keep your head down and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a lot of people that criticize, like I said, Disney, who want to be a context of kids shows at least, not really like just Modern Family or something, other ABC things. Yeah. They directly in a lot of the children's cartoons and stuff, they try to show as little of that as possible, simply because it's going to cause controversy with some people and praise with other people, and then ultimately they don't really want either one of they don't want controversy on either side, which is why oftentimes a lot of things may initially come off as bland or
really like neutered almost of any kind of specific value or opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so some people do that to broaden their commercial baseline, right? So it's the idea of like building your building with a wide base, or building your building with a more narrow base, but hoping to put more of those resources into getting that higher height.
Interesting.
Reaching new heights. I think that when deciding that it's really up to you. I think it's up to the context of the issue. With Kaepernick, as of right now, Nike's sales did dip for the first couple of days, people in the stock market, because there was a lot of people who were very upset about it. Kaepernick was treated as a hot potato.
Yeah, people were burning shoes and stuff like that. It's like a,
right. I mean, like, those people had already given Nike their money. Burning your Nike shoes or mutilating your Nike shorts and stuff like that.
It's the same thing. It's just virtue signaling to the other people like that, rather than if you really wanted to, you give it to a kid who doesn't have a pair of shoes or something like that. That'd be the real way to stick it to them.
Right. Well, and like I said, this is this dissociation with the idea of identity of a product and a company being associated with what you own versus the utility and the reason why you own it for needing it. Mm-hmm. And especially as we have more tertiary fields, and we have more we have lifestyles that are more divorced from what surviving in the world used to be like. The meaning of things has completely taken over, right? The idea of, are you a Mac versus a PC, or are you just a person who needs to get work done?
Exactly. And what does that say about what kind of person you are, the traits that go with it, where you even could stand in society, if you're having the cheaper version of something or more expensive version, or the people who just line outside to get their new iPhones every single year, almost like mindless NPCs or something like that too, that are just they're in it because that's the best thing and they're going to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's a lot of brands like Apple, for example, do build on that idea of that close identity. So so some people with the idea of your back to the idea of actions or your ownership or your image in a community being the value that people judge you based on. That idea that Apple has built their brand on being the sleek, the pristine, the finest, the greatest, the best, sort of thing. A lot of people, I work on computers and stuff like that, so I'm not really into all the Apple stuff. People who do are either one side or the other. Still, it's still pretty fairly split. But like there's always the third party individuals as well.
Yeah, of course.
Who use neither. But so like companies can do that where they create a personality with their image, which is why when you have something like Nike taking the side of Kaepernick, that's why people. It's kind of the same way that someone might write you in this turbulent political climate. So how someone might write you out of their life if you said... if
you posted the wrong thing on Facebook, or if you disagreed with them in a comment section, or if you voted for a political candidate versus B political candidate.
Right, exactly. Especially if it's someone that you're normally very close with on either issue, right? And the reason why people are prone to dropping the hot potato is because there may be other people in their life that judge the association of that person as another aspect and component.
What consequences will they suffer if they don't have that, that currency on their side, specifically speaking?
Well, so it's the same sort of thing, right? Is that in the way that we perceive the intentions of someone. I mean, it's not not always, and I'm not speaking that I specifically do this, but in general, society as a whole perceives the intentions, or is taught to perceive the intention, lifestyle of someone as being of their own volition and control.
Yeah, so that's the way you would manage your reputation, is by these things that you're buying, like you said, not out of necessity, but out of desire and out of the want to identify with a particular group. And that's how you're able to push yourself forward rather than being lagged down by other people's opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the same thing where, especially with these people in more polarizing issues that are seen as either an absolute right or wrong. Someone might say, well, if you're not actively discouraging these people in your life from that aspect, or you still accept them despite having a different opinion on something, this isn't just an opinion you should have. This is like you shouldn't. Yeah, this is a stance. You shouldn't be. It's not. You shouldn't just. You can't just have an opinion on that, especially if it's something that doesn't affect you, right?
Yeah.
So some people say that that you're not truly of their stance or opinion because you don't fit into that by having that person, and then therefore that sort of thing.
It's like if you're not saying no, or if you're not specifically projecting out against it, then you're basically saying you're playing for the other team, or you don't care enough to fight for what's truly right. But again, moving away from that, in the age of a social media currency and what we were talking about beforehand too, how does, I guess, playing the politically correct character, individual, if you will, how does that contribute to them, gaining this social wealth or something like that? Is it just by politics, the words they say, the people they associate themselves with, the things they buy? Obviously, I think these all factor in, but where are they getting that from more so?
I think it's that people feel comforted by seeing something that they agree with, or if they get a certain feeling of justice, so to speak, from being progressive, or being part of a particular social movement, right? Like it's exactly related to the idea of those polarizing issues, right?
Yeah.
Is that someone who's very polarizing is going to have a big chunk of people on one side, right, and then a big chunk of people who don't like them on the other, and then they bank on getting on the idea of awareness and getting their name out there, right, by a bunch of those people. But then there's the people, like you said, who they want to please as many people as possible. So because social media has the power to magnify the voices of someone, even if that dissonance happens to be smaller, in this case, like the alt-right, I think calculated-wise counts 4 to 6% of all conservative views and stuff the extreme right, like the extreme far right, counts for like 4 to 6% of all conservative views. But because of the presence of social media, it's been
picked up a lot quicker, blown out of proportion. Thinking every person who's more right on that spectrum, they're just a racist in waiting or something like that too, come out and pull their conservative beliefs. Yeah, and it's exactly the same way with the left as well, right? Not everyone wants to strip everyone's personal paycheck, to seize the means of production and institute a perfect world where no one's poor. Not everyone's hardcore like that as well, right? So but I think the distinction with that is slightly different, because with our culture and the way it's set up to, and the more capitalist nature of obviously our society and how that plays into the advertising, it's like, well, we want that, that'd be ideal to go toward that utopian system, but it's just not going to happen because of the corrupted patriarchy that we're already in. To drop that phrase.
Yeah, truly, we are way in too deep. But just as a side comment on the idea
of course,
on the idea of a top-down, shadowy sort of oppressive control system. If said system was truly the root cause and pervasion against progress, then really that sort of group would savor the people who are most extreme and drum up the loudest support of it. The people who were literally shaking after the results of the election, who then had their results blown up, right? It's always easier if someone is really, really worked up over something, and maybe to the point where they're acting not very moderate, or not really, because we perceive someone's views as typically more palatable when they're more calm about things, right?
Yeah, but I think you're correct when you say that, though. And the people that were literally shaking, maybe it has less to say about them and their actual reaction, because if you pull that down to it, it's if you look at the facts and stuff, nothing drastically changed. Nobody's being hauled away to jail. These people were fed a specific narrative that maybe played on some of their fears as well as their biases, and pushed them to that point. And people who are attracted to that kind of ideology with that kind of psychology and behavior, I mean, it's like putting out food for a hungry dog and expecting them not to eat it. Like, it's just, those people are just going to come to that naturally.
Yeah, just like, I mean, that's exactly just like the idea is that they get a certain value and feeling of being associated with these ideas that they happen to agree with, right?
Yeah.
And regardless of what side of whatever side of an issue you might be on, right? Polarizing issues, like I said, they attract more people who are who act more like sycophants.
Yeah,
but,
no, exactly. They're just trying to come around you and be like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you need, we're going to build you up, and then eventually they're just going to wait for you to fall down.
Right, because they experience a feeling of reward and pleasure and wealth on a very basic level from those sort of things, right? And then feel threatened and confronted by opposing sort of ideas or views, right? So if you count this in the idea of like credit versus like a credit versus a debit or deficit in that sort of sense, right? That that someone who feels emotionally wealthy is going to want other people to experience this, right? Or then they're gonna believe they honestly believe that what they're doing is, or what they believe is, absolutely right and true. And similarly, in the same way that someone who is a Jehovah's Witness goes door to door to people's houses, spreading the good word because they truly believe that this is, and like that religion is exactly, it's a community structure, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's that idea of someone within the religious structure, someone who is socially wealthy in the context of a religious structure, someone who most explicitly closely follows like the Bible and stuff like that, or whatever holy text that they are, right? Yeah. So, and what happens is that because this is a term of feeling of social wealth amongst peers and stuff, basically it will lead to a lot of people who may feel resentful. Oh, that Mary, there's no way she could be as good as people really think she is, right?
Yeah, so it's being, instead of jealous of your neighbor's new car, their awesome possessions, their hotter wife, exactly whatever you want to do, it's more like, oh, those people have that position, they are so quote-unquote woke, they hang out with these people, they do that, and that's what they more aspire to. And then, like I said before, those people are going to be naturally kind of led, I feel, a little bit more like sheep. I could be wrong, and maybe that's just their perspective and the ideology, but I think it definitely has a more magnetic feel to it, in the sense that people can just pick up on that certain movement, that certain hashtag, and just be led to it without any kind of nuanced thought in their own mind. Be like, I agree with most of this, but here's where I disagree. It's like almost all or nothing, and if you're nothing, then you're the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's that sort of thing, is that regardless of whether or not it's your car, or it's your local church, the car that you have, or your local church community, or this meme you posted on Facebook that might be unsavory and
those dank memes,
right, and it might not have actually reflect your particular beliefs to a core, but it is this outside perspective that people perceive, right? And then it is the reaction, it is the collection of reactions that people within that community judge your value and worth based on.
For sure.
So, it's just all the same things, just sort of in a different form, if you will.
Yeah, and then I think, going off into the last main point that I want to talk about too, is breaking down the difference between the connotation and the denotation of specific words or phrases that could be linked to a politically incorrect mindset or politically correct thought, and how that breaks down the communication between two parties. Because if somebody says one thing, means another, where does that kind of leave the person in the middle?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically this is associated with words that are considered to be disparaging or harmful. Someone of a group that may be previously or actively marginalized using said terminology believes that oftentimes that should be stricken from usage, unless, of course, being explicitly used in the act of reclamation.
Play that out a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so the idea of reclamation is that it's not so much about the word itself, right? It's more about the power that it comes from, right? So basically, it comes down to a power structure within a social structure.
Okay.
So using racist language, for example, is used to demean people of color, or people regardless of whatever, of a specific race. But when someone of that specific race, that is a word that's used to lord power over someone and to demean them. But people oftentimes will use that word within their own community. Mm-hmm. Rather as and of course this is something that people are very divided on.
Yeah, like using the N-word in gangster rap or something like that.
Exactly.
Versus like who has the availability to that what are the intentions behind it, malice versus just, that's the song that you're singing with all your friends, and you might not be one person that fits into that category of like, oh, that's okay, that's fine for them to say. Kind of where does that put you?
System sort of thing. So,
yeah, exactly. Awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I want to thank you, Aidan, again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll have you again some other time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, no problem.